So welcome to the Visiting Artists and Critics series. It was founded in 2011 as a collaborative program between the UCCS Galleries of Contemporary Art, or GOCA, and the Visual Art and Art History programs here at UCCS. Over the past decade, the series co-produced by the Galleries of Contemporary Art and the Visual Art and Art History programs has invited artists and scholars to the UCCS campus to present public lectures and work with students in classes and workshop settings. Today's lecture is the culminating event of the 10th season of the series, and the past decade has included presentations by artists and arts critics of national and international significance, with the goal to foster understanding and appreciation of contemporary art through dialogue and critical conversation. This lecture by Joe Bertini highlights a significant international artist who we have been fortunate to show in the Ent Center for the Arts Gallery for the last several weeks, with a reception immediately following Joe's remarks. I have to say, on a personal level, it has been such a treat to venture down from my office into the gallery and spend time with the work over the last several weeks. I hope you'll agree. It is stunning, and the more time I spend with it, the more I see and the more emotionally drawn to the work I am. It's now my pleasure to introduce the director of the Galleries of Contemporary Art, Daisy Mcgowan. Daisy leads GOCA programming in curatorial and administrative aspects, and is a wonderful collaborator across the Ent Center. Please help me welcome Daisy Mcgowan.
Thank you so much, David. Well, welcome to our final Visiting Artists and Critics Series lecture of the 2021-2022 academic year. We are so fortunate to culminate the 10th annual series with this artist who will grace our stage and whose stunning and vital paintings, as David shared, have filled our gallery since early May, Joe Bertini. This exhibition is co-presented with the Smokebrush Foundation for the Arts, and I'm grateful for their support and the origination of this project. A bit more about this program. The UCCS Visiting Artists and Critics Series is generously supported by the CU President's Fund for the Humanities, by Colorado Creative Industries, the B. Radenberg Foundation, our UCCS Student Government Association, and our many, many GOCA donors who make everything we do possible. If you are one of our PAC donor circle members, please raise your hand so we can recognize you. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to share with you that following Joe's lecture, musicians Thomas Studer and Bob Tudor have a special music performance. So we're really in for a treat today. And I'm delighted now to introduce to you Joe Bertini. Joe Bertini is an award-winning, internationally celebrated artist hailing from Australia. Known for her paintings and drawings of desert landscapes, people, and animals, her work has been acquired by private and public collections, both nationally, internationally, and is also on display in many public art galleries, museums, and institutions. We feel very fortunate to have brought her work here to Colorado Springs and to the Ent Center for the Arts. So for 10 years, Joe Bertini worked as an expedition artist on scientific and ecological survey expeditions in the most remote and inaccessible desert regions of Australia. A published art book, Field Work by Joe Bertini, celebrates her long and intimate engagement with the Australian desert, and a copy is on view in the gallery next door. I encourage you to take a look. She also maintains a desert studio here in southwestern US, near Abiquiu, New Mexico, which she shares with her partner, Thomas Studer. And Joe continues to focus her artistic interests on desert people and places, painting and working in some of the most remote and inaccessible desert regions of the world. And I want to share, I'm very proud, we have a catalog publication that is being released tonight. And so I encourage you to take a look. It's in the gallery available. And has some wonderful writing that Joe provided and wonderful images of the works. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Joe Bertini.
Thank you. Firstly, I have some thank yous. So I'd firstly very much like to thank Daisy Mcgowan, the director and curator of this incredible gallery, the Goka Gallery and the University of Colorado Springs. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to bring my work here and to share it with you. I also very much want to thank, heartfelt thanks to Smokebrush Foundation, to Kat Tudor and Don Godey, because you have honestly been remarkable. And aside from myself, I know you support an extraordinary artistic community, and your generosity is something that I haven't encountered before, and I'm obviously very grateful. I'd also like to thank the musicians, all the musicians that worked on this project. There have been musicians in Australia from symphony orchestras, violinists, cellists, saxophone players. We've had made available to us sound recording studios, professional sound recording studios. Everybody's donated their time and their generosity gratis. Nobody's ever asked for any kind of reimbursement. And I'm very grateful to Bob Tudor and Thomas Studio, who are going to perform live for us tonight, and particularly to Thomas, who has composed all the music. If you get time, there's a video that he made, a small film documentary to accompany the exhibition and the paintings. The music is original music that he composed, wrote and performed and scored. And I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say mostly is that I made these paintings, but you've all made the exhibition. Honestly, it's taken a whole team to make this exhibition. It's taken years and a lot of planning, but we did it. So I'm very proud of that. So thank you. So what I thought I'd do initially is to just give you a brief background on who I am, because obviously there's only probably a small number of people who I actually know, and you don't have any idea who I am. So I'd like to give you a little bit of a background history, if I may, if you'll just indulge me, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. Just see if I can work out the technology. That's going to be the tough thing. Okay. So, as Daisy mentioned in her introduction, I worked for 10 years as an expedition artist into the remote, inaccessible areas of Australia. And I don't really want to go into a lot of detail on that work because I'd like to spend more time focusing on this exhibition. But I just want to tell you that 10 years of expedition work, we worked with camels because unlike America, Central Australia has no roads. So you have to walk to get anywhere, and the camels carry all the equipment, but we all walk. And it was scientific survey, research and recovery expeditions, archaeologists, anthropologists, ornithologists, botanists, every ologist you can imagine. And we go to areas often with Indigenous people or areas that have never had any kind of human even traversing. When you go to certain areas, you'll often find evidence of human history, but Australia is such a vast continent, there are still areas of Australia that haven't been traversed. So there's no human footprint, and we were the first people to go to those places. So very special 10 years of work that I'm just going to show you a couple of photos. So as an expedition artist, my job was to document the expedition, which meant any scientific work that needed to be documented, but also the journey itself and what happened, the people, the events, the story of each expedition. So I spent my whole time with a sketchbook. When I had time, I'd pull out my gouaches or my watercolours and paint, but most of the time just recording fast all the time, everything. And also walking. So months and months and months on each expedition. And it's very physical, obviously, but very rewarding. So here's just an example. Some of our scientists from the National Museum of Australia, Dr. Philip Jones and Dr. Mike Smith, senior anthropologist, senior archaeologist, and we're walking, and all of a sudden we walk to a clay pan, and there's all this cultural material. So these are grindstones, broken grindstones, base plates, top stones, and of course the expedition stops. Nothing can be interfered with. Everything gets documented, photographed, if we're allowed to photograph it. If we're not allowed to photograph it, I get yelled for, "Where is she? Get her out here." And I have to draw it. I have to document it for them before we move on. So everything on the expeditions gets documented every step of the way. So it's very time consuming. Sometimes there's not a lot to document, other times there's just too much. Here's Mike Smith again, senior archaeologist, and this was a dinosaur fossil. We walked right over the top of it, and nobody noticed it except Mike, because we just see it as bits of dirt, basically, and a little bit of stone fragments. You think it could be something. He immediately saw it as the lower jawbone of a diprotodon, which is a long extinct dinosaur. So we did all the documentation, and then 3 years later we were given permission by the federal authorities and the Indigenous custodians to go back. We dug it out with a team of scientists, we wrapped it all in plaster bandages, and we took it out of the desert. And it's the only complete diprotodon fossil now, I think in the world, but definitely in Australia, and it's hanging in the National Museum. So these things are very important for the National Archive and for human history. And we take ecologists with us who dig traps and catch animals, and of course then they don't kill them. So in the morning I go up to the sand dunes with the scientists, and they're constantly putting their arms down these traps and pulling out God knows what, and going, "Quick, quick, quick, it's biting me, quick, quick." And I have to, so I'm drawing it. So, and it has to be correct, obviously, because you can't draw a mouse with 3 or 4 feet. You can't be artistically creative, you have to be scientific, so. And these are, they're a type of, they're called bearded dragons. They're a type of Central Australian desert lizard. And one thing I've learned a lot of things from 10 years working with scientists. If you turn a lizard upside down, it becomes inert. So if you're holding a lizard or you capture a lizard and you want it to stay still and not struggle, just turn it upside down and they just... The scientists, they stroke their tummies and the tails curl up and the feet curl up like, oh. Anyway, so it's the best way to draw a lizard is turn it upside down. And these scientists, a lot of the ecologists I work with, the guy on the left is Dr. Max Tischler, he's an ornithologist, and the guy on the right is Dr. George Madani, is a reptile specialist. But they help each other, they all know as much about each other's specialties. It's extraordinary, the knowledge. But this was a cave system that we found, and they just go in there on their stomachs in the dark and reach for things and pull it out. And in Australia, you don't want to go reaching for a snake because it could kill you. And George came out in the dark and his head torch wasn't working. He's like, "I've got no idea what it is, but it's a snake and it's around my wrist." And the snake came out first. And Max said to him, "Ah, it's a Simpson python, George." And George is, "Thank God for that. It could have..." So anyhow, I'm going to be quick with this stuff. So this is what I do. I work with them, I document everything they show me, everything they want me to document, but then also I get my own time, obviously, and I like to do portraits of the people, and I paint the camels, and as any artist would, you just see constantly things that you want to paint and draw, and so I work all the time. So this is just a couple of images from my sketchbook, just to give you an example of how quick sometimes I have to be. That was a baby camel that was out in the desert with us one year, and I noticed one of our big male bull camels walked over to the baby and stood over the top of it to provide shade because it was very hot. So the sensitivity of the camels, the sensitivity of the animals, everybody, because they're scientists and because we're all passionate about what we do, everybody notices everything, and you just realise that we're also connected. The animals watch us, we watch them, they watch each other, and there's a lot of dynamics going on. And as an expedition artist, it's my job to see and record really fast all those dynamics. This is an Indigenous elder that I worked with a lot, Don Rowlands, his name is. He's a custodian of a major part of Central Australian deserts, and he's the senior lawman, the senior custodian. And he comes out in the desert with us and he tells us stories, and he tells us his dreamings and the mythologies, and we compare that with the scientific information. He'll say things like, we know that there's a gypsum quarry somewhere here in the desert, which is like a plaster, a white plaster, because our people used it in initiation ceremonies. But there's never been a gypsum quarry out in those red sand dunes. And so it's been disproved. And we've done many, many years of expeditions with him, and one year we found it. So it's one of those things that often the scientific record can't justify the Indigenous knowledge, but then when you can combine the two, it's wonderful for the Indigenous custodians because it's proven in the scientific record of Australia. So, and Don walks in the desert with his chihuahua and he takes it everywhere. It's his darling. So when I said to Don, can I do a portrait of you, Don, because the National Portrait Gallery in Australia wants a portrait of Don, and he said, well, only with the chihuahua, so of course. So this is just a little drawing just to give you an idea of what the expeditions look like. And then I work up my sketchbooks and drawings into paintings, and they become much larger oil paintings, just to give you an understanding. So that's the Australian work. Then I was invited to go to India, and I've worked in a lot of deserts around the world, but I thought I'd just, for purposes of trying to be a little bit more concise, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about India, which was the deserts that I worked in when I first started coming to the American Southwest. So I was initially working here in the American Southwest under a residency that I was invited to do in Santa Fe, but I simultaneously had been invited by the Indian and Australian governments to work in the northwest deserts of Rajasthan, Kutch and Gujarat of India, along the border of Sindh and Pakistan and the Indus River. And I wanted to do both, so I said yes to both. So I went and lived, in 2015, I went and lived with the different nomadic tribal groups of northern India, and I was asked to document my time with them, and I was given a year, and then the following year I was asked to do an exhibition in New Delhi at the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, which is a big major museum in New Delhi, and to show to India and to the Indian politicians and to the Indian people how important these nomadic tribal people were to their culture, to the Indian culture and Indian community, because they're the most endangered people on the planet. So, and their animals are the most endangered animals on the planet. So I went and I was given this remarkable opportunity to live and work with them. So I just thought I'd show you that I did exactly the same thing I do in Australia, I did out in India, except obviously language was a problem and culture. So the wonderful thing about being an artist is that, and the reason I was invited was because these people will not allow a photographer to photograph them, and they also will not allow men into their communities often because it's a threat. But a woman and an artist, no problem, no threat there. So I get privileged access to go and to live with these people, help them with their babies, help them out, and they identify, and they're incredibly generous and open their whole lives and communities to me and tell me in long, detailed, usually nighttime conversations about all their problems, and I can't understand a word they're saying, but I know there's a lot going on there. So, and their camels are very different to the camels I'm used to working with in Australia, and the way they handle their camels are different. So they wanted to know all about how many camels I had and all of how I worked with camels. So we had a great kind of cultural symbiotic exchange around camel handling and camel rearing. But they live their traditional lives the way they've lived for centuries, for thousands of years across northern India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and they've come over originally from Persia. So a lot of these people are very dark-skinned but with blue eyes, and the Indians of the rural villages where they traverse their nomadic routes, those rural village Indians and those small towns and communities are very impoverished as well. And they're also trying to graze animals. So they're competing for resources. So they move these people on. They don't recognise them as being part of their community, the blue eyes, the different skin, the different Rabari or Jat or the different tribal groups. And so they throw stones at them, they persecute them. It's really tough to witness. And these are the Mir children, who are the street children. They're all homeless, they're all parentless, and they all only manage to survive through whatever they can scavenge. But also there are a lot of NGOs working out there that took me out to these kids who are just fantastic. And they just love it when you draw and paint, because it's like a party trick and they've never seen it before. So they want you to paint everybody who's important. So they bring out anyone in their community that's the elder or important within the community, and you have to paint them. You have no choice. If you see something else you want to paint, forget it. You don't get anywhere until you've painted all the important people. So my first job was to paint all the important people, and usually their babies or their grandchildren, because that's pretty important to them too. So I'll just briefly mention this. This woman is called Lakuben, and she's one of the most respected weavers, and her works are collected by museums all over the world. She dyes and weaves. She's part of a tradition, a matriarchal tradition of women weavers. Short story is they asked me to paint her portrait for the exhibition. Of course, they took me to her. I painted her portrait. I did a whole lot of sketches and drawings, but then she demanded to see them. And she was really unhappy, and she was just like yelling at the interpreter and yelling at the political person that was with me, and I kept saying, what have I done wrong? Like, for me, I'm looking at it thinking it's pretty accurate, you know. What she said, I made her look too old. So these are just a couple of pictures from my field work, so I just thought I'd show you, because I can't obviously go through it all. So this is the gouaches and the paintings and drawings I do when I'm out in the field. That buffalo, so these are night herding buffalo. The buffalo only feed at night. The milk of that buffalo is very specific. It has an enzyme in it that there's a couple of the Indian camels, a particular breed of camel, but that buffalo as well. And they're highly endangered. There's only a few hundred left. And they have these herders that take them in the night to feed and graze at night. They have an enzyme in their milk that suppresses epilepsy and fitting. But the buffalo is disappearing, and they haven't even researched the potential of this. Anyway, that buffalo and his herder, they were standing, and I asked them to just stand still, and then I realised the buffalo was leaning on his herder, and the man was doing this, but he was trying so hard not to move for me, but the buffalo was leaning on him. It was so sweet. So this was this is the museum in New Delhi. I'll just show you quickly. This was the result of the exhibition, and I wanted to collaborate with the people that I'd lived with, so I asked them to make me weavings, and I asked them to make me embroideries and everything, and I bought it from them so that I could incorporate their culture, their material, their artworks with my own. So I incorporated my paintings within their weavings, within their embroideries, within their art making. So it was a big exhibition, and my wonderful partner Thomas had to install the whole thing, which was a whole other story. So here are some of the paintings that were in the exhibit. That's a saddle cloth. So that's a camel saddle bag that I opened up, and they've embroidered, and all the different motifs have meaning. And I can't go through them all, but that's Lacuben. That's the painting of Lacuben and her great-granddaughter. And that is her weaving, and it's made out of camel and goat hair that she dyed black, and all the little white spots that are that have been embroidered into it. And I asked her to embroider her initials in the bottom. So she signed it and I signed it. So it felt like a collaboration. So anyway. So now we get to New Mexico. So I was invited, as I said, in 2015 to come to the American Southwest and do a residency in Santa Fe and work with the George O'Keeffe Foundation and SAR, which is the Scientific America Research Institute or something, I can't remember. And they gave me carte blanche to their archive and their museum, which was extraordinary, with all the incredible pottery collections, the weavings, just this wealth of historical, cultural material. And also took me out to Chaco Canyon on an expedition with some scientists, with botanists and archaeologists, and I'd never seen anything like it before. So I spent 3 months, as long as my visa would allow me, and they invited me to come back every year for 3 years. And that's when I started to fall in love with the American Southwest. And I haven't even scratched the surface. Traveling Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, all these incredible desert areas. The thing that struck me the most out of my decades of working in deserts around the world, the similarities between the deserts of the American Southwest and the rest of the deserts in the world that I've worked in. I identify things. So I can identify a fossil. I can identify a stone tool. I can identify pottery shards and tracks and scats and things like that. So I can identify them, but I don't know what they are because they're so different. So I can say, I know that is a stone tool, but I don't know what type of stone tool it is. In Australia, I could tell you if it was a grindstone, a topstone, or a base plate. I could tell you if it was a chipping tool. I could tell you if it was a chula ab to go in a spear, like a boomerang or a woomera. In here, I come and I find these bit of stone, and I can tell that it's been chipped and worked, and I know that it has a human footprint, but I don't know what it is. And pottery shards, like a lot of indigenous cultures, the Indians reuse everything. So it's been really fascinating for me to discover your landscapes and the diversity of your landscapes. And people often look at the paintings that come as a result of all the years of research and work and say, oh, they're so colourful, they're so bright, or they're so expressive, or they're so dramatic. But look at the landscape. I mean, it's extraordinary to me. The American Southwest is one of the most dramatic desert landscapes I've ever witnessed. It really is so emotionally theatrical. This cloud comes over and everything changes. So, and these incredible gorges, and then these massive mountains, and it's desert. So I find it spectacular, and everywhere I go, it's different. This is in New Mexico, this is the white place. Just to have this whole area that's completely white and all a limestone created valley, but then you go a couple of kilometres up the road and there are these red cliffs. So I paint what I see, and if the colours are very bright and very dramatic, so is your landscape. I found 2. They're right here in Colorado. They find me camels. So the colours, I just wanted to give you an understanding of the sort of dramatic nature of the landscape. And obviously this would be familiar to those of you in Colorado Springs, these incredible, just walking up these valleys and these things appear. And they look like acts of God that have just been gifted to an artist. So I've been very grateful. And you know, you talk about the yellows in my painting, right there, it happens every fall, these incredible colours, this incredible light play. So just before I start to talk to you about the actual paintings, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a context. I don't know how we're going for time, but if we're okay for time, if I can do this. So I want to tell you a little bit about this exhibition. So the artworks in this exhibition emanate from many decades of research and field work into the unique and fragile beauty of remote desert landscapes and the people and cultures that have flourished there. These are places that simultaneously invoke a sense of the vastness of the space, but also a personal intimacy, while retaining a fierce, unexpected wildness. The environments are mostly seemingly harsh and inhospitable worlds, yet they've always inspired in humans this primary instinct to create. This exhibition, Deep Inland, explores the extraordinary intrinsic value, the interconnected and essential nature of these special places, but through a particularly female lens. This is very distinct from the established historical archive of desert understanding. So if you imagine historically early explorers and early expedition artists were men, because it's a tough gig, it's a really tough gig. So in all major archives, institutions, universities, museums the world over, that historical archive has obviously been built upon, but the bulk of it is a male perspective. And I think it's very important to recalibrate that and offer a particularly female perspective into these desert landscapes. These artworks become a type of elegy, a memorial, extending the traditions of landscape painting and oral storytelling. Trees can talk, mountains can move, rivers hold secrets, and grains of sand weave myth, knowledge, and ideologies from past to present. So it's not science, is what I'm trying to say. Art is not science, and my paintings are not pretending to be realistic representations or scientifically accurate. That's the work that I do when I work as an expedition artist for the museums and universities. My exhibitions of paintings are my own personal interpretation, and as such, they become composites from all my decades of knowledge and understanding. I may not be able to recognise your animals, and I may not be able to identify your birds and plants, but they look so similar to what I've seen in other parts of the world and what I've been able to learn from working with Indigenous people in other parts of the world and scientists, that I know them. So often I'll see a plant and I'll say, oh, that looks like pitchery. And then I'll ask an Indigenous person or a scientist and say, is that like a native tobacco? And they'll say, yeah. And you think, oh, wow, I got that. And then other times I think, oh, that looks like we have a native desert tomato that grows in Australia, and they're very, very high vitamin C content. So if you have a headache, you eat them and they help you with your headache. And I'll be in India and I'll think, oh, I know what that is. And they're like, don't touch that, that's poisonous. And you're like, okay, I don't know what that is. So more of your landscapes. And these are the quick gouaches that I made in my sketchbook when I first came. And I thought, because I have a huge number of sketchbooks and watercolors and gouaches, I thought I'd just pick out a couple from Colorado and Colorado Springs in particular. So I thought you'd be able to probably recognize some of these places. So now I want to talk very briefly about how I make that transition from the field work, which is very important to me, which is obviously my research and getting the experience and the knowledge and the stories all together. So I do the field work, and then I go back to my studio and I put everything out in the studio and all the sketchbooks. And if I'm working on a particular region for a particular show, I get all my documentation out and I look at it and I think about it. And I think, what does all that come together to say to me? What is the exhibition that I want to put together, and what are the paintings I want to make? And I spend a long time thinking. I take a lot of notes, and I look at it all, and normally something rises to the surface, and there's a thread, or there's some kind of coherent narrative, or a visual narrative, and it all starts to become a story. And that's when I start to make the paintings. And I usually turn my back to the sketchbooks, but they're all there. And it's kind of like, I'll use the analogy of say a heart surgeon. So when you go in for open heart surgery, you don't expect the surgeon to have all these notebooks out. And just a sec, I'm just gonna check it. You kind of hope he knows what he's doing, you know. So I do all the study, I do all the fieldwork and the research, and then I have it all there if I need it. But normally I just turn my back to it and I've got it. I've got the painting I want to make, and I start making the painting. And one painting leads to the next painting, and I just get in there and start working. And it starts a conversation between the paintings and between the lines of thought. And you find threads in the sketchbooks that you remember, and you find, sometimes I think, oh, yeah, I don't quite remember, was that, what time of day was that? What was the weather? And I'll go back and I'll check my records. But mostly, you just paint and it develops, and the body of work just develops. So these are the, briefly, I just want to single out a couple of paintings that are in the exhibition. So this painting is about geography, and it's a geography of mythologies. So I was really interested in the dramatic geography of your landscapes, your geology, and the fact that it houses so much human history. And it's the same the world over. The beauty of deserts is they're like time capsules. They preserve things. So we can find eggs within salt lakes of deserts that were actually eggs of living fish when the desert was underwater. So the wonderful thing is, for scientists, deserts house the planet's history, but also for anthropologists or for anyone interested in Indigenous history and Indigenous culture or human history in any way, deserts have these great sedimentary layers of human history and human footprints. And just merely by traversing these geologies and living and hiking, walking, living in the deserts, you're contributing to those human histories. You're the next layer of human history. And your footprint is stepping on top of footprints of those beneath you. So this painting was all about the human history, the geology, the deserts as that type of time capsule. This was the painting about the wild Gila River, and I learnt, one of the first things I learnt when I came to the American Southwest is you have the same issues. It's a problem worldwide, obviously, of rivers being used as a resource, rivers being dammed, rivers being used for irrigation and farming purposes. And I learnt that the Gila River was an endangered river because there were people wanting to dam it and mine it, and it's one of the last wild rivers in the southwest. And it is extremely important. Not only, these wild rivers are so fundamentally important for the ecology, the thing about the wild rivers is the whole, as I've mentioned, the whole river is sacred. It's sacred to Indigenous people, it's sacred to ecosystems, it's sacred to animals, to birds, to microorganisms that we know nothing about. Most rivers are under-researched and underexplored. And the most important thing about wild rivers is their source. And the source of wild rivers is so incredibly important because it mostly is an artesianal source. So the wild river usually springs from a mound spring, a well that comes up through the subterranean levels of the earth, through fissures and cracks in rocks. And if you imagine those artesian basins lying within the earth are millions, trillions, they're as old as the planet. And they contain the secrets hidden within the earth. And every time the water comes to the surface, it's bringing those secrets up to the surface. Every time, scientists love to go to mound springs and sources of wild rivers because they discover new flora and fauna and microorganisms every time they go, because this stuff is just coming to the surface that we've never seen before, we've never known before. And if you dam a river or if you obstruct it in any way, you lose a thing called, it's called the Cascade Effect. There's another term for it as well, another scientific term. And all those microorganisms, all that magic that's coming up from deep within the history of the earth has a trickle-down effect, and it feeds the whole river. And it feeds unknown ecosystems and species that we don't know what it does. But that magic, the whole river needs that magic. And if you stop it or inhibit it or interfere with it in any way, we've lost it before we even know what it is we've lost. So this was a very important painting for me, to learn that you have the same issues we have, and India has, and all these other countries have. The world's becoming desertified, water's becoming a really important resource, and everybody wants it. So it's very important to protect the natural wild rivers. Thank you. So this little painting, it's not little, but anyway, I call it little because it's very dear to my heart. This painting is, and actually, if you don't mind, if I have time, I'd just like to read you, and if you do get a chance to look at the catalogue, I left some of my notes from my studio and my thinking, and Smokebrush has been amazing. Don and Kat have been incredible, allowing me the indulgence of printing some of my writing and my thinking and my notes, which I think helps to inform the paintings. And Daisy's been incredible. She's put together an audio guide, so you can go around, if there's any paintings you're particularly interested in, you can go around with the audio guide and it will give you the notes, it will give you the thinking behind the paintings. So, but there's a couple that are particularly dear to me, and this is one of them, and I just thought I'd read you just a little bit of the notes. It's called Call and Response from the Last Frontier. What would the last migration be? What would the last species of its kind call for? Who are we if we abandon those places and creatures we love? Who are we if we no longer recognise or value the beauty of places of wilderness, the night sky, the tenuous and fragile links and interconnectedness of our natural world? If we lose these precious places, we lose our ability to dream, to imagine, to create. And then what future do we have? There's a great blue heron that lives very close to our house in Abiquiu that we often see wading amongst the rushes and reeds of the Rio Chama. It is there year-round, summer and winter, seeking sanctuary. In the last few years of desert drought, I have seen it stand sentinel by the deeper pools. It stands on the edge of its wetland, a place of renewal, an oasis in the desert, as an act of faith. It is completely engaged, completely present, a feathered Buddha casting blue shadows on the sand, fishing in the shortest day of the year. The winter and summer solstices turn in it and turn in us. We seek the same places of refuge. We belong to the same tribe, now of fractured individuals who can only commune with remnants of wilderness. So it's important to me to know that this act of devotion, that this blue heron, who's a metaphor for all of us, we all have an act of devotion to a certain territory, to a certain country, to a certain garden that we have a connection to. And it's important that we preserve it and fight for it. And it's important that we stand sentinel as an act of faith, of goodwill for the future, and as a belief that the rain will come and it will be okay. So birds often in my paintings, or animals in my paintings, and also the paintings themselves, the trees, the things that you recognise in the paintings, they have a dichotomy. They have a type of renegade quality. They appear to stand for one thing, but they may actually be metaphors for something totally different. So, the little bird is very important to me, that painting. So this is dry Land Reef, this painting. And this painting is about what I've learnt about the American Southwest. It's so incredibly different to Australia. The centre of Australia is inverted, so as you walk further into our interior, you're walking downhill. Australia's shaped like a bowl, whereas in America, you walk uphill. And you have high deserts, which is extraordinary to me. And these high deserts were once under the ocean. And some of the highest places, these high mountain areas, I think in Utah and Nevada, they have just recently discovered remnant fossils of sea creatures, and most particularly sea anemones and sponges that we've never known of before. So there's all this research happening up in those high desert areas. And often when you look at the plants, if you're someone who spends a lot of time hiking or in the deserts of the world, you look at the plants, and I'll often look at the plants and think, oh, they look like sea anemones or sea sponges. Sometimes the salt bush, you can catch it in a certain light and it looks like a sea sponge. And it's the memory. The desert holds a history. The desert has a memory, and that memory keeps being brought subtly into our sensitive kind of understanding of, yes, actually, I was an inland reef. So often what we instinctively as humans associate to be, oh, that looks like that, I've found out scientifically it's often true. So if you think something looks unusual, and this was one of the first things that the scientists taught me, if you're hiking and you see something that catches your eye and you think, oh, that's a nice looking stone, it catches your eye because it's out of place, because it's unusual. And that usually means it's a signifier. It means something. So if something catches your eye, it's important. The desert's telling you something, or you've spotted something instinctively, that's important. And it could be cultural material, it could be a fossil. Like often I'll sit and I'll be painting or drawing some rock shelf and I'll say, oh, I just love the lines in that, they look like drawings. And an archaeologist will come along and say, oh, they're all plant fossils you're drawing. And I think, oh, there you go. It looks like drawings and they're plant fossils. So, I didn't know that. But instinctively, you notice things that are unusual or different or catch your eye, and they're important, so pay attention. And this painting is what you want it to be. It can be representation of a dry land reef, the once, the aquatic sea that did cover the continent, or it can be just the flora that now exists and is out there in desert regions. But they're both relevant, whether they're romanticised and imagined or whether they're scientifically accurate. Both are true. This painting is about, it's about the medicinal nature of desert plants. And one thing that I've been so fortunate to learn working with Indigenous people is a little bit of the medicinal properties of their country, of their plants. The desert contains plants that I'm sure you're all aware of, have very high hallucinogenic qualities. They also have very intense medicinal qualities and often allergens, which I'm sure you know about. But all those properties of those plants have been used by Indigenous people for thousands of years all over the world. And in Australia, we have 80,000 years at the minimum, they're saying, but they've now taken the record to 90,000 years of human use of Indigenous plants. And the medicinal properties, the allergens and the hallucinogenic properties of plants are scientifically recorded now and proven. They house an incredible knowledge storage that, because our tribal elders and our Indigenous people have become so marginalised and their homelands have been taken from them, we're losing that knowledge before we even know what it is. So scientists worldwide are out there desperately trying to record the Indigenous knowledge of plants, to pair it with the scientific knowledge of plants and the medicinal uses of plants. And when I came to the American Southwest, one of the first things that happened to me was I got allergic and my eyes swelled up and itchy and everything. And I thought, wow, this is powerful stuff. They got a lot of good stuff out here. And then I started learning about the Native Americans and the Indigenous people and how they use medicinal plants. And it's extraordinary. I have this Navajo friend, and I went out with her walking one day, and not just the plants, but those little beetles that lift their bottoms up and spray you. I forget what they're called. The little black beetles that you see everywhere in the desert here. And DY said to me, those things are fantastic if you cut yourself. And I said, what do you mean? She said, my son, he was out on the reservation and he cut his finger open. And so my mother, who was an elder of the Navajo women, and she immediately got one of these beetles and irritated it, so it sprayed its little whatever it was on her son's cut. It's an antiseptic, it's an anaesthetic, and it closed the wound. And DY raced him to the hospital and said, I think he's going to need stitches. And they said, no, he's good. So this is but the knowledge of the Indigenous knowledge of flora and fauna is fastly disappearing. And that painting is about that. Water tree, I know I don't have much time, so I'm just going to be really quick. The water tree of Doubtful Creek is, when you see, and I've learnt this, when you're out in the desert and fields and fields of sand dunes and rocky, dry, barren, apparent wasteland, there will always be a plant. And plants are signifiers. If you see a plant in one of those areas, it means water. And Indigenous people know this. And Indigenous people can traverse the whole continent of Australia without carrying any water, because they find the signifiers in the landscape and they know where to dig for water. This is about the salt forming as well, but I don't have enough time to go into that, but you can read it in the catalogue or in the audio. This is jasper, so this is about the magic stones and crystals that exist in deserts around the world. And I've learnt that Native Americans value the stone, the jasper stone, for the same reason that it's valued in Australia and in India and Africa. It's the blood of the earth, and it's a healing stone, but it's also a water divining stone. So it's jasper is a really powerful stone, but this painting's not just about jasper, it's about those secret magic places that contain all these crystals and these geological formations that we're now discovering are linked into our own cycles and rituals. So our circadian rhythms are actually can be changed according to weather, according to in India there's special places that women, especially these nomadic tribal women, they go to give birth. And they go to these places to give birth because they're protected. They know that the birthing process will be healed and helped by the natural crystals and stones in the landscape. They're sheltered, they feel safe. It's all that knowledge is still the way we can live our lives, and we need to learn to live our lives, and it's disappearing really quickly. So this is just about about jasper, but it's also about the geological power that we have. It's under-resourced and under-researched, but we're destroying it really quickly. So this is a diptych in the painting, and this is about wayfinding. It's called Wayfinding, and it's about upside-down country. And just briefly, the only thing I really want to, there's a lot I could say about this, but what I want to say about this painting is that if we reroute our rivers, and this is starting to sound like a lecture, environmental lecture, and I'm sorry if it comes across, but upside down country is really important for migratory animals. So there are a lot of animals that migrate, not just birds, but I used a bird again as a metaphor. But deer, elk, bear, lots of your animals are migratory animals. And they use natural landforms as wayfinding, as paths. So they will follow rivers, they will follow mountains. Scientists have done research skin mapping fish, and they can find out where that fish was born, where that fish travelled, and the whole life experience, basically, the story of that fish, the biography of its life is mapped into its skin. And this is the same with a lot of animals. Animals are so synchronicitous with the landforms and the Earth's surface. They rely upon it for the whole species knowledge. So it's handed down from generation to generation that they migrate up certain river routes and everything. Aboriginal people call, and scientists have a term for it as well, but I can't remember what it is, but the Aboriginal people call country that has been disturbed upside down country. So if you mine a landscape, if you dig into a landscape and mine a landscape, or if you reroute a river, you're turning it into upside down country. And upside down country for Indigenous Aboriginal Australians is bad country, useless country, because animals can't find their way anymore. So if we can move a mountain overnight, we can create a mountain, we can dig out a mountain, we can obliterate a mountain, we can change a river course pretty quickly. And then what happens to all those species that rely upon it for their migratory routes? That's what that painting's about. This painting is also about searching, the idea of searching. The birds, I don't know if you can see the little white, the migratory birds that are in the distance. This is also about migratory routes, but it's also about the idea of our own paths, finding our own way in the desert, and how your experience, your life experience, is mapped on your skin just as much as any animal's skin. And it's vitally important to us to understand that we are so interconnected. We're an animal. on the planet, just like all other animals on the planet. We're so dependent on water. We're so dependent on the history of the desert and the landforms, the plants and animals. We need to watch what's happening. So when you see a flock of migratory birds in the desert, and Indigenous people know this, they watch the desert, they watch the plants and animals. An animal calls and they listen because it's telling you something. A flock of birds takes off, take notice of that, but that means something's happening. So they're signifiers. And I mentioned before, if Indigenous people love to watch termites and ants, and I never really understood that when I was walking out with some women that, out in remote Australia, and they took me out digging for honey ants because they love honey ants. And they took me out with their digging sticks to dig for honey ants. It's women's business, so I was allowed to go. And they're talking to me all about the ants, and they have this whole ant dreaming and everything. And the thing I learned was ants are so clever. And when I was talking to the scientists about this later, I found out that ants are one of the highest density of animal species in desert regions, and we only know a fraction of those species. We haven't even identified most of them yet, let alone researched them. But the Indigenous people, they watch the nests, and if they see an ant nest in the desert and it's covered in sticks, then it means it's hot. It's going to be hot. If they see it covered in little stones, it means cold weather, because the stones act as insulators for the nest, and the stick acts as letting the wood acts as letting the heat out of the nest. So they like to keep the temperature very stable. If you are walking in the desert and you see a termite mound or an ant mound, and all the sticks or stones that act as insulation have been removed from one side, the ants can remove all the insulation on top of their nests like that, so fast. And if you see all of that's been removed from one side and piled on the other side, it means weather's coming from that side. There's a storm coming. And the ants are smart. They don't want to have to go out and collect a whole lot more sticks and stones. So they just put them all on the other side. And then when the storm comes in and blows over the top, it doesn't blow it all over the desert, just on the other side. So this is what this painting's about, watching and listening to the desert and trying to learn. Blood Moon Birthing Tree. So this painting is about the sacredness of certain places in the desert. And it's how we feel when we're connected to a certain country. So there's a reason that you're attached. You're attached to certain landscapes. You're attached to certain country as your heartland or your homeland. And it's because of a really deep-seated human instinct for security. And you know that's a safe place for you. You know that's a benevolent place for you. And this blood moon is all about birthing cycles. Most Indigenous native peoples have particular places that are safe and sacred, particularly through certain rituals, initiation rituals, birthing and death rituals. And there are certain trees that are sacred trees because they are safe for those rituals. There are certain mountains, there are certain hills, and if you're out walking, say in this incredible landscape here in Colorado Springs, and you see this tree that catches your attention, or these red crags that capture your attention, and you think, wow, that's special, that looks special, it probably is. And it means it's probably been a special sacred site for humans for hundreds or thousands of years. And it's a signifier of a safe place, a place where you can go to give birth, a place where you can be sheltered from a storm, a safe place for initiation, a place of water, a place of healing. That's what this painting's about. So I think I'm being wrapped up, am I? And that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.